Dr. Hannah Kim rubbed her tired eyes and leaned back in her chair. She had been staring at the same holographic display for 6 hours straight, but the data never stopped being terrifying. The blue light cast eerie shadows across her face as the three-dimensional image of a void hunter slowly rotated in front of her. The creature was a living nightmare, 8 feet of pure death wrapped in black, chitinous armor that sparkled like obsidian under the station's lights. Each plate of armor was harder than military-grade titanium, capable of deflecting plasma rounds that could melt through a battleship's hull. Its 6 legs ended in razor-sharp claws that had carved through starship metal like butter. But what made void hunters truly terrifying wasn't their physical power. It was their intelligence. Military reports described them hunting in coordinated packs, setting traps that fooled seasoned space captains, and adapting their tactics faster than any organic species should be able to. They could survive in the vacuum of space, cling to the outside of moving spacecraft, and wait for days before striking. Some survivors claimed they could communicate without making a sound, sharing information across vast distances through methods that baffled xenobiologists. Dr. Kim, we've got another update from the Andromeda sector, called out Jiwon, her research assistant, from across the lab. His young face looked pale under the fluorescent lights. It's not good news. Hannah sighed and minimized the hologram. Let me guess. Another colony? Epsilon mining station. 3,000 Altarians working the asteroid fields. Jiwon's fingers danced across his tablet, pulling up the incident report. Security cameras caught everything before they went dark. The void hunters came out of nowhere, moving through space like they were swimming through water. They cut through the station's defenses in under 20 minutes. The images that flashed across Jiwon's screen made Hannah's stomach turn. Massive holes torn through reinforced bulkheads, emergency lights flickering over twisted metal and scattered debris. The Altarians hadn't stood a chance against creatures that treated their advanced technology like tissue paper. Any survivors? Hannah asked, though she already knew the answer. None. Same as always. Jiwon shook his head. The rescue. Teams found evidence of at least 12 void hunters. They took everything. Equipment, supplies, even the computers. Left nothing but empty corridors. Commander Daehyun looked up from his security station near the lab's entrance. The grizzled veteran had fought in 3 interstellar wars, but even he seemed uncomfortable when discussing void hunters. That makes 47 colonies in the past year alone. Zentorians, Carillions, Vex, hegemony outposts. They're hitting everyone. Everyone except us, Hannah muttered, turning back to her research. This was the puzzle that had been driving her crazy for months. She pulled up her master database, a comprehensive list of every documented void hunter attack in the past 3 centuries. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of colonies destroyed. Millions of beings killed across dozens of species. Trade routes abandoned. Entire sectors of space declared off limits. But in all that carnage, in all those centuries of destruction, there was one glaring anomaly. Not a single human had ever been killed by a void hunter. Not one. The Galactic Council still thinks it's just statistical luck, Commander Daehyun said, reading over her shoulder. Admiral Torres believes we simply haven't had enough contact with them yet. Give it time, he says, and they'll come for us too. Hannah frowned at her screen. She had always been good with numbers, and these numbers didn't make sense. Humans had been expanding across the galaxy for 300 years. They had colonies in 47 star systems, mining operations in asteroid belts, and trading posts along every major space lane. The idea that they had simply avoided contact with void hunters through pure chance was mathematically impossible. Computer, display galactic map, she commanded. Mark all void hunter attacks in red. The hologram expanded to fill half the lab. A 3-dimensional representation of their local galaxy cluster appeared, dotted with thousands of stars. Red markers began appearing like drops of blood against the starfield. Each marker represented death, destruction, and terror. Now overlay human colonial expansion routes in blue, Hannah continued. Blue lines spread across the map like a spider web, connecting human worlds and showing the paths their ships regularly traveled. Hannah expected to see some overlap, some intersection, between human routes and Void Hunter attacks. What she saw instead made her breath catch in her throat. The red markers avoided the blue lines completely. Not just mostly, completely. Wherever humans had established trade routes, built colonies, or sent exploration missions, the Void Hunter attacks stopped. It was as if someone had drawn an invisible barrier around all human activity, and the galaxy's deadliest predators refused to cross it. "That's impossible," G1 whispered, staring at the display. But it wasn't impossible. It was deliberate. Hana pulled up the detailed migration patterns that xenobiologists had pieced together from survivor accounts and debris analysis. Void Hunter. Packs followed predictable routes through space, moving from system to system in search of prey. But whenever those routes approached human space, something strange happened. The packs changed course. They went around human territories, sometimes adding weeks to their journey just to avoid passing through areas where humans might be present. "Computer, calculate probability of accidental avoidance based on current data," Hana said. The computer hummed for several seconds before responding in its emotionless synthetic voice. "Probability of accidental avoidance, less than 0.0001%. Recommendation, investigate alternative explanations." Commander Dae-hyun let out a low whistle. "They're doing it on purpose. The deadliest predators in the galaxy are actively avoiding us." Hana nodded slowly, her mind racing. This changed everything. Void Hunters weren't mindless killing machines. They were intelligent, calculating hunters who chose their prey carefully. And for some reason, they had decided that humans were off limits. The question that kept her awake at night was simple. Why? What made humanity so special that creatures capable of destroying entire civilizations wouldn't even approach a human? Settlement? What did they know about humans that humans didn't know about themselves? As if reading her thoughts, G1 pulled up another file on his tablet. "Doctor, I've been going through some of the older archives. There are some classified files from the early colonial period that might interest you. References to something called Project Erebus and First Contact Protocols from 3 centuries ago." Hana felt a chill run down her spine. 3 centuries ago was when humanity had first started expanding beyond their home system. It was also, according to her data, when the first Void Hunter attacks had been recorded. "Pull everything you can find," she ordered. "Cross-reference with colonial authority databases and military archives. There's something in our history that these creatures remember, something that makes them afraid to come near us." Outside the lab's viewports, the stars stretched endlessly into the dark. Somewhere out there, Void Hunters were hunting, killing, destroying everything in their path. But they gave humanity a wide berth, steering clear of human space like it was radioactive. The deadliest predator in the galaxy was afraid of something, and that something was them. The warning sirens were still echoing through Kepler Station when the lights went out. One moment, Dr. Hana Kim was reviewing her research data in the comfortable glow of the lab's holographic displays. The next, she was plunged into darkness as the solar storm's electromagnetic pulse fried every system on the station. Emergency power kicked in 3 seconds later, flooding the corridors with blood-red light that made everything look like a scene from a nightmare. Hannah's hands flew across her tablet, trying to access the station's status reports, but half the systems were offline. "Solar Storm Classification 7, announced the station's AI in its calm, mechanical voice. "All non-essential systems offline. Defense grid compromised. Estimated repair time 47 hours. 47 hours. Hana felt her stomach drop. They were sitting ducks in the middle of space with no shields, no weapons, and no way to call for help. The communication array had been the first thing to go when the electromagnetic wave hit. "Dr. Kim, we have a problem." Ji-won's voice crackled through the emergency comm system, distorted by static. "Motion sensors in Cargo Bay 7 are going crazy. Something big just came through the loading dock." Hana was already running toward the observation deck before Ji-won finished speaking. Her footsteps echoed off the metal walls as she navigated the maze of corridors, following the emergency lighting strips embedded in the floor. The station felt different in the dim red light, larger, more threatening, full of shadows that could hide anything. She reached the observation deck just in time to see something that made her blood freeze. Through the reinforced windows, She could see three sleek black shapes detaching themselves from the station's hull. Void Hunter attack craft, each one the size of a small fighter, but moving with an organic fluidity that no mechanical ship could match. They came in during the storm, she whispered to herself. Used the electromagnetic interference to mask their approach. The security feeds were still working on backup power, and what Hana saw on the monitors made her understand why every species in the galaxy feared these creatures. The Void Hunters had cut through the cargo bay's reinforced doors like they were made of paper. 3 of them, each one moving with deadly grace through the station's corridors, but they weren't killing randomly. They were hunting with purpose. On Deck 4, she watched a group of Zentorian engineers barricade themselves in a supply closet, their blue-skinned faces pale with terror. The creature's heat sensors would find them in minutes. On Deck 6, a family of Carillion traders huddled in their quarters, frantically trying to send distress signals on dead communication channels. The alien crew members were doing exactly what prey animals did when cornered. They were hiding, hoping to avoid detection. But Hana noticed something that made her forget to breathe. The Void Hunters were avoiding the human sections of the station entirely. "Computer, display human crew quarters on security grid," she commanded. The holographic overlay showed her what she needed to see. Commander Dae-hyun was in his office on Deck 3, calmly checking his weapons and preparing for a fight. Engineer Minjun was in the maintenance section, trying to restore power to the defense systems. Dr. Soyoung was in the medical bay, preparing for casualties. All of them were in areas that the Void Hunters were systematically avoiding. The creatures moved through the station like water flowing around stones, never entering corridors or rooms where humans were present. "It's deliberate," Hana whispered. "They know exactly where we are, and they're staying away." The comm system crackled to life again. "All personnel, this is Commander Dae-hyun. Barricade yourselves in secure locations. Do not attempt to engage the intruders. Military Protocol 7 is now in effect." But Hana was already moving. Against every rule, every protocol, every instinct for self-preservation, she stepped out of the observation deck and into the main corridor. The emergency lighting cast long shadows on the walls, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of metal being torn apart. Her footsteps echoed in the silence as she followed the trail of destruction. Claw marks gouged deep into the metal walls showed her which way the creatures had gone. The marks were precise, surgical. These weren't random acts of violence, but calculated moves by intelligent predators. She found them in the central junction, where 5 corridors met, in a star pattern. The Alpha Void Hunter stood in the center, easily 8 feet tall and covered in that terrifying black armor that seemed to absorb light. Its 6 legs were positioned for maximum stability, ready to spring in any direction. 2 smaller Void Hunters flanked it, their heads constantly moving as they scanned for threats. The Alpha was facing the corridor that led to the alien crew quarters. It could smell them. Hana was sure of it. These creatures were perfect hunters, and terror had a scent that they could track across kilometers of space. But when Hana stepped into the junction, everything changed. The Alpha turned slowly, its 6 compound eyes focusing on her with an intelligence that made her skin crawl. She had studied these creatures for years, but seeing one up close was like staring into the face of death itself. Its mandibles clicked softly, and she could see rows of teeth designed for tearing through armor plating. For a moment that felt like eternity, predator and human stared at each other. Hana could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She could smell the metallic scent of the creature's exoskeleton. She could see her own reflection in its compound eyes, and then something impossible happened. The Void Hunter tilted its head, almost like a curious dog. Its posture shifted from aggressive to something else, something that looked almost like recognition or respect. Then it stepped backward, not a small step, not a hesitant movement. A full, deliberate step away from her, as if she were the dangerous one in this encounter. The Alpha let out a low, rumbling call that seemed to vibrate through the station's hull. The sound was unlike anything Hana had ever heard. Not quite animal, not quite mechanical, but something in between. It was a sound that spoke of intelligence, of communication, of decisions being made. The other two Void Hunters emerged from the shadows where they had been hiding, moving to flank their leader. For a moment, all three creatures stood there, studying her with those alien eyes. Then, without warning, they turned and began moving back toward the cargo bay. Not running, these creatures didn't flee from anything. They were making a strategic withdrawal, moving with the same purposeful grace they had shown when they entered. Hannah followed them at a distance, her tablet recording everything. She watched through the cargo bay windows as they boarded their sleek attack craft. The ships detached from the station's hull and accelerated away into the void, leaving behind only confused aliens and more questions than answers. "Dr. Kim, are you all right?" Commander Daehyun's voice came through the comm, tinged with worry and disbelief. "I'm fine," Hannah replied, but her voice was shaking. "They're gone, all of them." "What happened?" "The security feeds show you walking right up to them." Hannah stared out at the stars where the Void Hunter ships had disappeared. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but I think they were as surprised to see me as I was to see them." What she didn't say was what she was really thinking. The Alpha Void Hunter hadn't looked at her like she was prey. It had looked at her like she was something else entirely, something that demanded respect, something that maybe, just maybe, it remembered. Dr. Hannah Kim hadn't slept in 3 days. Empty coffee cups littered her desk, and her eyes burned from staring at classified documents that most people didn't even know existed. But she was close to something big. She could feel it. "Doctor, you need to rest," Ji-won said, setting another cup of coffee beside her keyboard. "You've been at this for 72 hours straight." Hannah waved him off without looking up from her screen. "Not yet. I'm missing something important, something that explains why those creatures acted the way they did." The encounter with the Void Hunters had shaken everyone on Kepler Station, but it had given Hannah a new direction for her research. She had requested access to the colonial authorities' deepest archives, files that required clearance levels most scientists never achieved. What she found there made her question everything she thought she knew about humanity's expansion into space. "Found it," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she opened a file marked with more security warnings than she had ever seen. Project Erebus, classification level black, access restricted to Colonial Command only. Commander Daehyun looked up from his security reports. Erebus, that was one of the first colony ships, wasn't it? Left Earth around 2387? "Not just any colony ship," Hannah said, her voice growing excited. "Look at this passenger manifest. 5,000 colonists, including some of humanity's best military strategists, xenobiologists, and adaptive warfare specialists. They weren't just exploring, they were preparing for something." She pulled up the holographic display, showing the trajectory of the colony ship Horizon as it made its way toward the Erebus system. The route took them through 17 different star systems, many of which were now marked as Void Hunter territory. "Computer, begin playback of Captain Minho. Park's personal logs dated March 15, 2387, Hannah commanded. The room filled with the voice of a man who had been dead for 3 centuries. Captain Park sounded tired, worried, but determined. "Personal log, day 43 of our journey to Erebus Prime. We've made contact with a species the xenobiology team has designated as hunters. They're not what we expected." The hologram shifted to show primitive images captured by the Horizon's sensors. The creatures in the recordings looked like Void Hunters, but different, smaller, weaker, and clearly terrified. They moved in ragged groups, their black armor scarred and broken, like refugees fleeing from a war they couldn't win. "They're running from something," Captain Park's voice continued. "Dr. Kwan thinks they're the survivors of their species. Whatever destroyed their homeworld is still out there, still hunting them. The hunters won't communicate directly, but they keep pointing toward the edge of our sensor range. Something's coming." Ji-won leaned forward, fascinated despite his exhaustion. What were they running from? Hannah scrolled through the files until she found what she was looking for. "Computer, display combat logs from Erebus Prime, dated June 3rd through June 20th, 2387. What appeared in the hologram made all 3 of them step backward. The creatures in these recordings weren't like anything in the known galaxy. They seemed To exist partially outside normal space, their forms constantly shifting and changing like living nightmares. Where they moved, reality itself seemed to bend and twist. The Devourers, Hannah read from the files. That's what the colonists called them. They weren't just predators, they were parasites that fed on the very fabric of space-time. When they consumed a planet, it didn't just die. It ceased to exist, as if it had never been there at all. The combat footage was fragmentary and disturbing. Entire sections of the colony were simply gone, not destroyed but edited out of reality. Colonial Marines fired their weapons at enemies that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Buildings aged centuries in seconds when the creatures passed through them. "Look at this," Commander Daehyun said, pointing to a tactical display. The colonists were completely outmatched. These things could warp space, manipulate time, phase in and out of reality. How did humans possibly survive? Hannah pulled up another file, this one from Lieutenant Yuna Cho, the colony's chief tactical officer. "They adapted," she said simply. "Listen to this." Lieutenant Cho's voice was steady despite the sounds of battle in the background. Day 12 of the siege. Conventional weapons are useless against the Devourers. But engineer Hyunwoo made a breakthrough. He's figured out how to reverse their phase variance using modified mining equipment. We're literally turning their own abilities against them. The footage that followed showed something unprecedented in galactic history. Human colonists were jury-rigging mining lasers to disrupt the Devourers' reality-warping abilities. They were using construction drones as weapons platforms, turning cargo containers into traps that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and somehow managing to predict the movements of creatures that existed outside normal space-time. "They're learning faster than should be possible," observed Dr. Kwon's voice from the recordings. "Every time the Devourers adapt their tactics, our people find a counter-strategy within hours. It's like they're thinking 50 moves ahead." But the most remarkable footage came from the battle's final phase. The humans had done something that violated every known law of physics. They had created a temporal feedback loop that trapped the Devourers in their own reality-warping abilities. The creatures that had been unmaking entire planets were suddenly unable to exist in normal space. "Computer display final combat assessment," Hannah commanded. The statistics that appeared were staggering. In 17 days of fighting, the human colonists had not just defeated the Devourers, they had hunted them to complete extinction across 17 star systems. They had turned an enemy that consumed realities into prey, using nothing but human ingenuity and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. The Void Hunters watched the whole thing, Hannah realized, pulling up the observation logs. They were hiding in the outer system, studying both sides of the conflict. They saw humans do something impossible. The final entry in the files was from Lieutenant Yuna Cho, recorded 3 days after the last Devourer had been eliminated. "The Hunters have approached our settlement. They're different now, stronger, more confident. They've learned from watching us fight. They've learned how to hunt again." But it was the next part that made Hannah's breath catch. "They remember what we did here. I can see it in the way they look at us. They know what humans are capable of when we're cornered. They've witnessed our true nature, and they respect it. They won't forget." Commander Daehyun was quiet for a long moment. "So the Void Hunters we know today are the descendants of those refugees," Hannah finished. "They survived because they learned from us. They became apex predators because they saw what apex survival looked like. But they also inherited the memory of what humans did to an enemy that everyone thought was unbeatable." Jiwon stared at the holographic display showing the final battle statistics. "We didn't just win. We completely eliminated a species that could unmake reality itself, and we did it in 17 days. "Not eliminated," Hannah corrected, scrolling through the tactical reports. "Hunted. There's a difference. The Devourers weren't just killed in battle. They were systematically tracked down across multiple star systems, trapped using their own abilities, and eliminated with what the reports describe as methodical precision." The room fell silent. As the implications sank in, humans hadn't just defended themselves against an impossible enemy, they had become something that even reality-warping parasites couldn't survive. They had shown a level of adaptive, relentless hunting that impressed creatures who would later become the galaxy's most feared predators. That's why they avoid us, Hannah said quietly. Not because they're afraid of us, but because they respect us. We taught them what it means to be truly dangerous. In their genetic memory, humans aren't prey. We're the species that can take anything. The universe throws at us and turn it into a weapon, the Void Hunters remembered. Across 3 centuries and countless generations, they had passed down the story of the humans who had done the impossible. They had seen humanity's true nature when pushed to the edge, and they had never forgotten the lesson. When cornered, humans didn't just fight back. They adapted, they learned, and they won against odds that should have been impossible to overcome. That was the truth hidden in the classified files, the ancient secret that explained why the galaxy's deadliest predators gave humanity such a wide berth. They had seen what humans could become when survival was on the line. And that memory would last forever. The quantum communicator crackled to life, filling Dr. Hannah Kim's lab with the voice of Dr. Boram Seo from the Xenobiology Institute on Earth. Even across the vast distance of space, Hannah could hear the excitement in her colleague's voice. "Hannah, you're not going to believe what we've discovered about Void Hunter biology," Dr. Seo said, her image flickering on the holographic display. "We finally got our hands on some genetic samples from that mining station attack last month. The results are extraordinary." Hannah leaned forward, her coffee growing cold as she focused on every word. After 3 days of digging through classified files and ancient battle reports, she needed answers that only cutting-edge science could provide. "Tell me everything," Hannah replied, activating her recording systems. Dr. Seo pulled up a complex genetic map that looked more like abstract art than biology. Void hunters don't just inherit physical traits from their parents like most species. They inherit memories, complete, detailed memories stretching back generations. What one void hunter experiences becomes part of the genetic code passed down to their offspring. The implications hit Hannah like a physical blow. Genetic memory, that's theoretically possible, but we've never seen it implemented on this scale. "It gets better," Dr. Seo continued, manipulating the genetic display to show specific sequences. These memory engrams aren't just random experiences. They're selective. The most significant events, moments of extreme danger, major evolutionary pressures, encounters with new species, these get prioritized and preserved with incredible detail. Ji-won, who had been listening from across the lab, suddenly understood. The Void Hunters at Erebus Prime, the ones who watched humans fight the Devourers, their memories are still alive in every Void Hunter currently existing, Dr. Seo finished. Every single one of them carries the complete experience of watching humans do the impossible. They don't just know about it intellectually, they remember it as if they lived through it themselves. Hannah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place in her mind. She pulled up the ancient battle footage from Erebus Prime, studying it with new understanding. The Void Hunter observers hadn't just been casual witnesses. They had been recording everything for posterity, burning those memories so deeply into their genetic code that 3 centuries later, their descendants still carried them. "Computer, analyze Void Hunter behavioral patterns during the Erebus Prime conflict," she commanded. The holographic display shifted to show the positioning of the Void Hunter observers during the 17-day war. They had positioned themselves at optimal viewing angles, moving to maintain visual contact even as the battle shifted across multiple dimensions. They had been studying human tactics, learning from every improvised weapon and creative strategy. "Look at this," Hannah said, highlighting specific moments in the footage. The humans were using mining equipment to disrupt reality warping fields. They turned construction drones into multi-dimensional weapons platforms. They were literally making it up as they went along. Dr. Seo nodded from Earth. "That's what makes it so remarkable from a Void Hunter perspective. Their species had been running from the Devourers for generations. In their memory, these creatures were unstoppable forces of nature that unmade entire worlds. Then they watched humans not just fight them, but systematically hunt them down. The battle reports Hannah had been studying took on new meaning. Humans hadn't just defended Erebus Prime, they had gone on the offensive. Within days of the first attack, Human colonists were tracking devourer ships across multiple star systems, using captured technology and improvised weapons to eliminate every last trace of the species. They watched us turn the hunters into the hunted, Hana whispered. Commander Daehyun joined the conversation from his security station. I've been reviewing those tactical reports. The humans didn't just win through luck or superior numbers. They showed a level of adaptive thinking that shouldn't be possible under combat conditions. The footage supported his assessment. In one sequence, human engineers were reverse engineering devourer bioweapons in real time, turning reality-warping parasites into anti-devourer viruses within hours of first contact. In another, colonial marines were using temporal feedback, loops, technology that shouldn't have been invented for another century, to trap enemies that existed outside normal space-time. The Void Hunters inherited more than just memories, Dr. Seo explained. They inherited the emotional context, the fear they felt watching an unstoppable enemy finally meet something more dangerous. The awe of witnessing a species that refused to accept defeat even when facing annihilation. Ji-won pulled up the genetic analysis on his tablet. So every time a Void Hunter looks at a human, they're not just seeing us as we are now. They're remembering us as the species that made the impossible. Look routine. The room fell quiet as the full implications sank in. The Void Hunters hadn't spent 3 centuries becoming apex predators, despite their memory of humans. They had become apex predators because of it. They had learned that survival in a hostile universe required more than just physical strength or advanced technology. It required the kind of stubborn, creative adaptability that humans had demonstrated at Erebus Prime. They modeled themselves after us, Hana realized. The pack hunting, the tool use, the tactical intelligence. They were copying what they remembered humans doing. Dr. Seo confirmed her theory. The genetic analysis shows rapid evolutionary changes beginning immediately after the Erebus Prime incident. Within 50 years, Void Hunters had developed enhanced cognitive abilities, improved tool manipulation, and more sophisticated communication systems. They were adapting to become more like the species they had observed. But the most significant change was behavioral. The ancient Void Hunters had been scavengers and opportunistic hunters, preying on weak or isolated targets. The modern versions were methodical predators who planned complex operations and adapted their tactics to each new enemy. They learned our most important lesson, Commander Daehyun observed. When faced with a superior enemy, don't just fight harder, fight smarter. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Humanity had inadvertently created the galaxy's most feared predators by teaching them how to hunt effectively, but they had also ensured their own protection in the process. In the genetic memory of every Void Hunter was the knowledge that humans were not prey animals to be hunted, but fellow apex predators to be respected. To them, we're the species that proved anything can be beaten if you're creative enough and stubborn enough, Ji-won said. We're living proof that the hunter can always become the hunted. Hana was about to respond when proximity alarms began blaring throughout Kepler Station. The quantum communicator crackled with interference as something massive began affecting local space-time. What the hell is that? Commander Daehyun shouted over the alarms, rushing to his sensor displays. The main holographic display lit up with readings that made no sense. Something was emerging from deep space, but it wasn't following normal physics. Space itself was bending around it, creating gravitational anomalies that shouldn't exist. Computer, analyze incoming signature, Hana commanded, her voice tight with sudden fear. The response chilled her to the bone. Signature matches archived data from Erebus Prime conflict. Classification, Devourer class entity. Probability of extinction level threat, 97%. Dr. Seo's image flickered and distorted as the communication link struggled against the reality distortions. Hana, that's impossible. The records clearly state— The records were wrong, Hana interrupted, staring at the sensor readings. We didn't hunt them to extinction. Some of them survived. Through the lab's viewports, she could see space itself, rippling like water, as something vast and impossible began to manifest in normal reality. After 3 centuries of hiding in dimensions beyond human perception, the Devourers had returned, and this time they knew exactly who had hunted them before. The proximity alarms grew louder as more signatures appeared on the sensors. But these weren't more devourers, they were Void Hunter ships, dozens of them, taking defensive positions around Kepler Station. The galaxy's apex predators were preparing to fight alongside the species that had taught them how to hunt. The Memory Keepers were about to honor their oldest and most important memory, the lesson that sometimes survival required becoming something more dangerous than the thing trying to kill you. The war that everyone thought had ended 3 centuries ago was about to begin again. Dr. Hannah Kim pressed her face against the reinforced viewport of Kepler Station's observation deck and immediately regretted it. The thing hanging in space before them hurt to look at directly. It wasn't just a ship. It was a violation of everything that should exist in normal reality. The Devourer scout vessel twisted and folded in on itself, its geometry changing every time she blinked. One moment it appeared to be the size of a small fighter craft, the next it seemed larger than the station itself. Space around it rippled like water, and stars visible through its semi-transparent hull appeared to be aging rapidly, cycling through millions of years in seconds. "My eyes are watering just looking at that thing," Jiwon muttered, adjusting the viewport's filters to reduce the visual distortion. "How did we ever fight these creatures?" Before Hannah could answer, new contacts appeared on the station's sensors. 3 sleek black shapes emerged from the void, moving with the deadly grace she had come to associate with Void Hunter attack craft. But instead of approaching the station aggressively, they took up defensive positions, their weapons aimed at the reality-warping monstrosity. "They're protecting us," Commander Daehyun said in amazement, studying the tactical display. "The Void Hunters are actually shielding the station." Through the docking bay's massive doors, Hannah could see something that would have been impossible to imagine just days earlier. The Alpha Void Hunter from their previous encounter stood in the center of the bay, its 8-foot frame dominating to the space. But it wasn't alone. A dozen human security personnel surrounded it, and remarkably, nobody was pointing weapons at anybody else. "Dr. Kim, you need to see this," came Engineer Minjun's voice through the comm system. "The Void Hunter is trying to communicate. It's using mathematical symbols on the deck plating." Hannah rushed to the docking bay, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. The Alpha had used its razor-sharp claws to carve complex equations into the metal floor, equations that any human scientist would recognize. Orbital mechanics, energy conversion ratios, the mathematical principles behind dimensional phase shifts. "It's showing us how the Devourers move between dimensions," she realized, studying the symbols. "Look, this sequence here, it's explaining how they use reality distortion to avoid conventional weapons." The Void Hunter noticed her attention and began carving new symbols. These were simpler, more urgent, attack formations, energy-focusing techniques, tactical coordination patterns that looked remarkably similar to the improvised strategies humans had used at Erebus Prime 3 centuries earlier. "It's asking for our help," Commander Daehyun said quietly. "They remember how we beat these things before, and they want to learn." What followed was the strangest war council in galactic history. Humans and Void Hunters worked together using mathematics as their common language, sharing tactical information carved into metal and displayed on holographic screens. The Void Hunters showed them how to track dimensional phase shifts. The humans demonstrated the improvised weapon modifications that had proved effective against reality-warping enemies. "They've been preparing for this day," Hannah realized as she watched the coordination taking place. "For 3 centuries they've been getting stronger, learning, evolving, all so they could fight these things when they returned." Engineer Minjun was already working with a team of Void Hunter technicians, their 6-limbed forms moving with surprising delicacy as they modified the station's weapon systems. They were installing some kind of phase variance disruptor, technology that combined human engineering principles with Void Hunter biotechnology. "The galaxy's immune system," Jiwon said in wonder. "They turned themselves into the one thing that could stand against the Devourers if they ever came back." The battle began 18 hours later, when the scout ship finally finished materializing in normal space. The moment it became fully solid, reality around Kepler Station started to break down. Gravity fluctuated wildly. Time moved in stuttering loops. The metal walls of the station began aging centuries in minutes, but this time the defenders were ready. The Void Hunter ships opened fire with weapons that seemed to bend space around their energy beams. The station's modified defense grid created intersecting fields that trapped the Devourer's reality distortions in small pockets of contained chaos. Human fighters launched with jury-rigged dimensional stabilizers, their pilots adapting tactics in real time as the enemy's abilities shifted. Hana watched from the command center as the two species that had learned from each other finally worked together. When conventional weapons failed, humans improvised new solutions on the spot. When human creativity reached its limits, Void Hunter raw power filled the gaps. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. "Look at this," Commander Daehyun called out, pointing to the tactical display. "They're using the Devourer's own reality warping abilities to create a dimensional feedback loop." The scout ship was caught in a trap of its own making. Its ability to phase between dimensions turned into a prison that collapsed in on itself. As the vessel imploded, taking a small chunk of local space-time with it, the remaining distortions gradually faded back to normal. In the aftermath, the Alpha Void Hunter approached Hana one final time. Without warning, it placed one massive claw gently on her shoulder. The gesture was unmistakably one of respect, a salute between equals who had fought side by side. Through the station's communication array, similar reports began flooding in from across human space. Void Hunter ships were taking up positions around human colonies, not as conquerors but as guardians. The galaxy's most feared predators had chosen their side, and they had chosen to protect the species that had taught them their most important lesson. "They're not avoiding us because they're afraid," Hana said softly, watching the Void Hunter ships prepare to depart. "They're protecting us because they respect us." As the alien vessels disappeared into the void, heading off to patrol the galaxy for more Devourer incursions, Hana finally understood the truth. Humans weren't feared as predators by the galaxy's deadliest hunters. They were revered as something far more dangerous, the ultimate survivors. The species that refused to accept defeat, that turned every impossible situation into a learning experience, and that had an unsettling habit of becoming more dangerous than whatever was trying to kill them. In a universe full of hunters and prey, humanity had carved out a unique niche. They were the teachers of last resort, the species that showed others what it truly meant to survive against impossible odds. And in a galaxy that was full of impossible odds, that made them the most valuable allies anyone could have. The Void Hunters remembered the lesson from Erebus Prime, and they would never forget it. Sometimes the best way to become an apex predator was to learn from the apex survivors, and humanity, it turned out, was very good at surviving. The end.